Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the second installment of my artist conversation series as part of season 11 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Matt Jaffe returns this week to talk about his fantastic new album, Gone Enough to Miss. We dig into how the album came about, how it builds on his previous records, plenty of discussion of the individual tracks, and all in all, it was another fabulously wide-ranging conversation about creativity, a little bit about the business of show. I've been a big fan of Matt's. I've talked to him lots on my socials. I've been a fan of his for a while now, so it was a blast to get to nerd out over an album that I know you also love once you spin it up. We've had shipments severely disrupted up here in Canada for the last few weeks due to a postal strike, but due to the workers being ordered back to work, unfortunately, it sounds like we are going to start getting mail through again in the next week or two. So I'm hoping that my physical copy of Matt's CD will be here soon so I can spin it up on my CD player. I have a special episode coming out next week that breaks from the chronological flow of releases in the Petty catalogue, but I don't think it'll be too disappointing with what it is. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with the wonderful Matt Jaffe.
Tom Petty. Tom Petty Project. Tom Petty. Hey, Tom Petty Project.
Well, first of all, I guess, big congratulations, Arinoda. You had some
thank
pretty
you.
awesome news recently.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, we've already been wedding planning for a while, but I don't know about everybody else, but it seems sort of de rigueur, this sort of cart before the horse thing, where
Right.
it's happening, and then the specific moment of engagement might be a surprise, but the event itself is not out of the blue.
Yeah.
Which is for good reason. I think it stems from a general balancing of agency between the sexes,
Of course.
and yet there's kind of surprises are fun. So something is lost, even if for good reason, I'd say.
For sure. I mean, an engagement, I mean, is a big deal obviously you and your friends and your family would have known that this was on the cards, but for the fans and for those people who you led into your life through social media, it's a big deal for us because we find, oh, Matt's getting married. This is amazing.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
yeah,
Yes, no, I mean, and it's a big deal. I don't mean to make it sound like
Yeah.
anything shy of a big deal. It's just, it's like the way you have to plan your life. You can't have big surprises, which is too bad. It's sort of one of those growing up things that you only see your friends once every 6 months or something. Or as college, it's great. You walk down the hall, you see someone. Now it's like, well, can we do Tuesday? Oh, I can't do Tuesday. Okay, well, I guess I'll see you in 6 months then.
Yeah. But that's, I think, as you get older, and you get into life, is that that those are your good friends is when it has been 6 months and you just say, hey, do you want to go out and get a drink, or you want to go out and visit or whatever? And it's just nothing changes. It's just like it was
Yeah.
yesterday. That's great, right? And when you get into those relationships, those are the ones that endure and last. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the new album, Got Enough to Miss, released on November 1st. After a lengthy release cycle of a lot of singles. So I wanted to talk about that as much as anything. We'll get into sort of the songs and the stories behind the writing and how you constructed those and put them together. But in terms of the release cycle, as an indie artist, that becomes its own thing then. Like, what was your sort of plan moving into this album in terms of I need to release each single, I've got this to say, this is going to be the artwork. How did that all come together?
Yeah, well, I mean, the total transparent truth of releasing so many singles is that in the social media age, where the internet, I don't even want to say the people on the internet itself, this hungry, insatiable machine, it's just, it's desperate for content itself being kind of an ugly word these days, because it sort of strips artistic output of like the germ of the artistry and only turns it into what it can do for you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm obviously starting to evangelize a little, but in the internet machine's need for content, it's like you want all the possible releases you can have, because if you turn one release into 9 releases, that becomes 9 sort of spikes in interest.
Right.
That's not a very glamorous answer, but the more you can sort of spread it without hopefully spreading it too thin, the more that's the more you should. And I'll say that I mean, we've talked a lot before, that I'm an album guy. So
Yeah.
in some ways it pains me a little bit that it's like, it sort of takes away there's an artistry unto itself of picking singles and releasing them, and then how that placement is reflected on the album. Like, putting a single deep on an album. Like I remember reading somewhere that Johnny Marr wanted There's a Light That Never Goes Out to be deep on The Queen Is Dead. And to me, that's so cool, because oftentimes the single is the first track, or often I think it's the third track, because I've read that for whatever reason, the record sounds best right around the third track. Anyway, again, I don't think it's the coolest thing to do, but I think on the flip side, we tried to approach every song like it's worth hearing. It could be something that if someone said, oh, here's this artist, maybe for a different person, any of those 9 songs could be the introductory song. So, it doesn't necessarily come from the coolest place, but maybe it delivers us somewhere.
But that's just, as you said, though, it's just the reality of it, right? These days that's what you have to do. And had the Beatles been around in 2024 or 2023, they would have had to do the same thing. So I think you can detach the art from the means of getting it into the hands of the people who are going to want to hear it, right? So I don't have any problem. And that whole thing about whether it's cool or not, it just is what it is, right? It's part of the business.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And business is such an important word, because I think there's such a desire to like conflate the artist with the pure unadulterated art. And like, of course we love to do that. We should want to do that. That's successful artistry in its own way, but it is a business, and we're beholden to certain things. And this is just a current thing that I think we're beholden to, and hopefully it's just a good practice, Yeah.
It was funny because I always go back to what Lemmy from Motorhead said. When Motorhead got their first album deal, their hardcore fans like Catherine said, "Oh, we're not going watching you guys anymore. You sold out. You just got a record because you want everyone to hear your music." And Lemmy's like, "Yeah, that's why we're doing it."
Yeah. Selling out is such a. Sorry, I imagine we're getting way off it, but selling out is a weird concept to me. When I see an artist I like taking advantage of their success, even if it's being in like a commercial or something, for something, I think like, good for you. You've done something awesome that I love, and you're being able to convert that into further success. That's okay. What are you doing?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, as long as the songs themselves are still good, and as long as the focus is still on the creativity, and that's where I think you've got 9 songs here. And like you said, the nice thing about releasing the singles is you can give any one of those songs to different people. If somebody likes Petty might like this, somebody likes The Darkness or Queen might like this. And I've got like little groups of friends in different parts who I say, well, listen to this one. I'm going to give the Petty fans, I'm going to give you Crying Lessons, because that's got enough Roy Orbison in it to satisfy that side of it. If it's, there's lots of that in there. But I was looking back, and one of the things I like doing when a new album comes out with an artist is just have a quick listen back to the album before it, or the 2 albums before it, just to see if there's a trajectory there. And listening back through Kintsugi, Undertold, White Roses in the Snow, it feels like you've got to a stage with this album where your sound is now locked in. You know how to use the studio like another instrument. You know what you want your album to sound like. And so sort of thematically as an artist, it sounds like this is now where you want to be. This is where you want to live.
Yeah, I think that's it's a scary thing to think about, arriving somewhere, but I think I think it's a good sort of marriage of like rock roots, which are always going to be there. Like it's such a gravitational center, and sort of like a more like studio inflected approach. Like I think with Undertow, especially, we sort of were like, well, how can we take a rock band and like sort of mess it up a little bit? Like some of these songs cannot be performed live like they are on the record, at least certainly not with a power trio or a rock quartet.
Right.
But some of them are like a little weird. It's like, well, what? Not bad weird, just sort of in sort of a, I don't know, like a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of like intermediary step. Not to compare myself to anyone, but like I sort of think of like some songs on Southern accents as being sort of these like transitional songs.
Yeah.
Where it's like, like he's sort of finding his way in this. You can tell like it's still the Heartbreakers, but they're like trying to introduce something.
Yeah.
Even like the production of Rebels, which an album or two earlier would just be sort of like this, a more by the numbers, like big rocker. There's some horns, there's some like more synthetic guitar sounds. And it's sort of like, okay, I can see where he's going. I'm not sure it's the arrival, to use that word again. And I think maybe there's some element of that in Undertow. Then I think White Roses in the Snow is like a big swing. Like it's difficult to perform, but in a different way. It's like, instead of taking a rock band and sort of tweaking, it's almost like sort of deconstructive, like saying like, here are the elements we want, but let's not even perform them. Let's like start from a place of not doing what we know how to do, and like sort of forcing it back towards original Matt, but sort of stopping in this more atmospheric space.
Yeah.
And I think They've Gone Enough to Miss is sort of a nice hybrid of the two. Like they're band performances, but there are weirder elements, but it's generally speaking going to be easier to perform as a band without having to like really, like when we do like some of the songs on White Roses in the Snow, it's like, okay, it's the same song, but like this is the live version,
Yeah. But that's great for fans though, right? Because I mean, again, I think we probably talked about this last time. When I see a band live, I don't necessarily just want to hear the song as it's done on the record every time. I want to hear a different interpretation of it, or maybe it's acoustic, or it's slowed down, or it's sped up, or whatever it is. And I think that with the scope of those songs on those, well, all four albums I just kind of mentioned, I think you have a lot of room to do that, right? Where you can reinterpret them and change them as you feel.
Yeah, and maybe counterintuitively, sometimes the easiest or the most satisfying way in which to reinterpret is actually just me and acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
Because there's such flexibility and like such control over what's happening. And I think it's a classic example of like limited tools allowing for greater creativity.
Yeah.
And I've got a whole spiel about that in the studio, but just for this, like I think I know that I'm working with the kernel of the song instead of sort of there's no bombast, there's no extravagance afforded to me. And especially during longer gigs, like I play 3-hour shows at like the Hard Rock Cafe in San Francisco. A few times a month I play 3 hours there, and sometimes people pay attention, a lot of times they don't, and that's okay. Don't worry, I'm not playing the Hard Rock Cafe because I think it's where I'm gonna be discovered, although you never know, because you should play every gig like that is where you're gonna get discovered. But as sort of a nice outgrowth of that, I can approach these gigs like, okay, here's Cut Me Down the Middle or something, and on the record it's like a 2.5 minute song, but maybe at the Hard Rock Cafe I'll play it for 10 minutes and like see where it goes.
Yeah.
And nobody is looking at their watch, they're looking at their French fries, so it gives me the space to like figure out where it's gonna go.
But that, and again, not to get cynical about the world, but do you sometimes think that when we get these reality TV shows where they're just dragging some kid who can sing a bit off the street, but who hasn't had that artistic grounding in playing for hours and making sure that you know every single facet of the song. I always think it's almost unfair to that person to throw them in and then say, okay, well, now we're going to put you on a record and now we're going to put you on tour, because they don't have that framework to be able to go out there and perform night after night in that way, in the same way that you can.
Yeah, I mean, we're just in such a strange place. Like, I think social media has pushed everything towards like uh mentality of like you can do it too.
Yeah.
Like I think that's foundational to YouTube and even more so now TikTok. My understanding of it, I'm actually not on it, but I read enough about it that I think it's like, here's a dance move you can do. Here's a recipe you can cook.
Yeah.
So I think the accessibility of various output is sort of like part of the appeal. Even if certain people do it especially well. So I don't know. I think the idea, we always talk about, everyone talks about the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, right?
Yeah.
And of course the Beatles are, the clinic in that, right? The textbook example. I almost feel like TikTok is like the antithesis of it. It's like the 0 hours rule. It's like, okay, you've never done this, but you can watch someone do this dance and you can do it too, and you can post it, and then Stevie Nicks might decide because you put Gypsy on in the background that
Right.
she wants to do it right back at you. And it's like, man, that's really weird. And I will say, like, the deep down, I am like, wow, that's not how this should be.
Right.
But then there's also this part of me that's sort of like, well, who knows? Maybe it leads to interesting places. I think it nags at my understanding of how someone should grow into their artistry.
Yeah.
And especially where it's like these songs, whatever you want to call them, they have to be 15 seconds long. Like, to me, that comes from an unfortunate cultural trend with the lack of attention span. So maybe it's symptomatic of an unfortunate thing. And yet, here's me trying not to be early onset curmudgeon. Like maybe it leads to interesting places that you only have 15 seconds to work with. I mean, I wish that 3.5 minutes was still, de rigueur, but maybe 15 seconds is interesting. I don't know.
Well, it's just, I mean, I'm 51 now, and I've got over that hump of, oh, everything sucks, and people don't know what they're doing. But it's just different, right? I mean, and it is
right.
Of course, it's going to drive interesting things at some point. We just don't know what they are yet, and it might not be exactly what I want to listen to. So I'll keep listening to my vinyl and keep listening to records that I like, rather than the 15 seconds. But that's not to say it's any better or worse, right? It's just a lot different. So.
Yeah, and it forces different creativity, and everything's gonna. Thank God people like different things. That whenever people have a conversation about, oh, well, it's like, well, man, I'm thrilled we don't all love Talking Heads.
Yeah.
I'm glad some people don't like David Byrne's voice.
Yeah, sure.
I think anyone like you or me or so many of the people I know, I think we identify in ways that are predicated on like having discovered things and decided we liked these things, not based on a sort of dominant trend. So in my own way, and maybe it's a little bit of a hipster inclination, but whatever it is, it's like, thank God not everyone likes the same stuff.
Yeah, what's the old adage that if it's popular, it's not cool? It's just not true. It is staying true, right? But you mentioned something there too, and well, I should say too that I actually didn't listen to each single as it came out, because after the first couple, I was like, I'm going to wait, because I am an album guy, and I want to listen, I want to consume this, I want to hear this as an album, because once we got the album, I do see a real intentionality behind every component of it. It's not just 9 songs that have been put together. Well, these are the 9 songs I've got, I'm going to put them on the album. The sequencing's important. Tonally, it's consistent, even though there's this eclectic blend of songs. And I wanted to sort of just call out or big up the production on this album is absolutely amazing. There's so many moving parts and so many different things that you're doing, that the production, to bring it all together and to cohere it into something consistent, that's pretty remarkable. And I really enjoy it.
Well, thank you. I mean, there are lots of steps along that process. Like, there are a lot of songs. I have a million songs, and I don't say that with any arrogance because a lot of them are real trash. Sometimes, yeah, you have to go to. My belief is you have to write the full bad songs too
Of
to
course.
get to good ones. Sometimes, hopefully, your batting average improves, but there's still going to be bad ones. So there's that, and my producer James helping me decide which are the good ones.
Right.
There's that, and then so much of the cohesive tone is mixing, I think. Like plenty of it happens in the studio, but
Yeah.
The guy who mixed the bulk of it, his name's Peter. He was just indispensable in making it all sound like it goes together because there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
A lot of different inspirations. Some of it leans very rock band, some of it leans much more sort of synthetic, and they always say, you know, a movie gets written 3 times. Once when you're writing the screenplay, once when you're filming it, and then once when you're editing it. And that sort of approach, I think, holds especially true with the mixing on this record. That Peter just came along and said, like, okay, here's what the album's gonna be. And his first mix for us was Chameleon, and
Right.
we were like, oh my God, this is exciting. Like this takes it somewhere immediately. I'm able to hear it not as the songwriter anymore. I'm just able to say, wow, that sounds really good.
Yeah.
So we had been using another engineer who was also great, and a couple of his mixes are still on the record. But we sort of were like, okay, I think we need to change horses midstream. We said, Peter, we heard this one mix of his, and we said, we think you need to take it over because you have given us the scaffold for the record. And he took it from there, and a lot of the songs just owe such a debt to that first mix that he did.
Well, it's funny though, right? Because you can't always articulate to a producer or an engineer, this is what I'm thinking, or this is what I'm looking for. But as soon as you hear it, then you know it. And as soon as you hear it, it's like you can't unhear that, then you can't go back then, right? Because you think, okay, well, if the album can sound like this, then we've got to go down this road. That's just a no-brainer at that point.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to, deal with the sunk cost fallacy too. It's like, I think we had a mix of every song on the album from this other guy. Who's also a super talented engineer, just it wasn't working. And it's like, well, it's the time sunk cost, it's also the literal sunk cost.
Yeah.
And also, like, listening to mixes is exhausting. To do it well, you have to have this horrible meticulousness. And James and I were sitting there listening to Chameleon, and we're just like, no, this is what it has to be,
Yeah.
You have to think of yourself in 10 years or 50 years instead of yourself over the next 3 months. It's so I'm grateful to James and Peter for going down that road with me, because it's mixing can be a painful road to walk down. It's just, I think, to do it well, you have to be willing to sort of beat your head against the wall. Yeah, to pass the point of any objectivity,
Well, it's one of those parts that, like, the artist rightly gets lots of credit for writing the song performance. I mean, the producer gets a lot of credit for steering the ship, but the mix engineers very rarely get the nod when really the whole thing falls down if they can't get the sonics right.
Totally, yeah.
Poor
no,
guys.
it's funny how certain roles get sort of lost. I think of that with screenwriters for movies too.
Of
It's
course,
like it all comes back to them, and yet no one, Hitchcock didn't write any of his screenplays, but never heard of anyone who wrote those screenplays. They're Hitchcock movies. It's like,
and Carrie Fisher is a script doctor, right? She improved or fixed dozens upon dozens of scripts in Hollywood that needed those little tweaks that she didn't get credit for. She just comes in, gets paid, and does the job and everything. But you mentioned on this one, because I was going to ask about this then. So this was a band recording. How much input did you get then from your bandmates on ideas, parts? Did you have a pretty fixed idea of all that, or?
So it's band in that everything was performed bass and drums, but
Okay.
James is the bassist on everything, and then our friend collaborator Vicente is the drummer on everything.
Okay.
And I used the word scaffolding earlier, and I think that's kind of appropriate here too, because we would do everything as a band, but then sometimes the production was taking away as much as it is adding.
Right.
Like what's one? Like Twilight of Our Prime, I think would be a good example of this, because it sort of sounds like a band, but no like Tom Petty fan would listen to that and think, wow, this is just like a rock band performing in the studio.
Yeah.
Be like, here's sort of an approximation of a band intentionally sort of subverted, I guess you'd say.
Right.
So we performed it as a band, but then sometimes we'd go back and take out the entire hi-hat track or something and replace it with something. So it's a band performance, but sort of filtered through, like, that song in particular, we thought, like, what if we use Take On Me, the Aha song, as like, what if we tried to make it sound like that? So, it'd be like, how can we subvert the idea of a rock band while still sort of using like this weird 80s idea of what a rock band could be?
Well, you've even got that big synthy chord at the beginning, right? That big suspended chord.
Exactly.
Immediately, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what they're doing. That's so
good.
I'd written that down. That's so cool.
Very good. I'm so glad you got that. No, I'm not sure anyone else has.
It's funny with stuff like that, though, too, where sometimes immediately you think, that's that song, or that's that song, where sometimes it just passes. And when you say to people, listen to this, what do you think that is? And they go, I'm not too sure. And then when you say it, like, oh, yeah, of course it is. Yeah. But that's cool. So a couple of nerdy things then on the studio side then. Obviously, there's a lot of synth drums on this album. So were they performed and then just triggered? Or were they programmed based on a beat that someone came up with? Or
More of the latter.
Okay.
We some of it was done very intentionally, sort of guerrilla style. Like we have this app on our phones called Funkbox, where you can just go in and program. It's like, I think it's like $5. It's total junk, but we'd go in and say, this is kind of fun. So we'd literally like, take this, and I don't even know if we'd take a dongle out of a phone, plug it right into the board, and do that. And then sometimes we'd go augment with like a real kick drum or something, or like a more old guard sanctioned trigger or something. But be like, well, like there's sort of such an idea of how something's supposed to be. We'd be like, well, we actually really like the sound of this thing on the iPhone. Let's just use it.
Yeah.
So more programming and trying to not fall victim to like a status quo, I guess.
But that opens up. It opens up everything for you then, though, right? Because if you're not limiting yourself to saying, well, we have to do it this way, then anything that sounds good and anything that fits the song then becomes, okay, well, we'll use that. There's a great musician I listen to, another indie guy, Cyber Attack, who's been on the podcast, Ivan Anderson. And one of his quotes, he does a YouTube channel where he talks about guitar pedals lots. You'd probably enjoy him. He says, anything less than 100% wet is weakness. And he's kind of over-egging that and sort of joking, but what he means is, go to the extremes and find out whether you can use them, right?
Totally. I mean, that's certainly my philosophy with pedals too. Is on stage I have everything at 10 because I think of it like stage makeup. Like on Broadway or whatever. Like they have this eye makeup that if you see someone up close, like it's horrifying. Like what's that? That doesn't look human. But I think if you're in the nosebleed section, like, you're not going to see someone's eyes unless it's like that. And I think of music effects the exact same way. Like tremolo, like sure, in the studio, like maybe you can do sort of a gentle, nice tremolo, but on stage you need it to be this. Otherwise people they're not even going to pick up on it.
But you've got so many great guitar tones on this album. So that was my other nerdy question is that all those tones then, are you finding those tones thinking, that's what I want, that's on my board, set it up, play it? Or are you also taking a clean signal in so that then you can send it back out and do it afterwards?
We try to do the former.
Okay.
There are times where it would just be too foolish to tie your hands in post production, but we certainly, when we feel it's safe enough to do, we say, okay,
Right.
this phaser sounds really cool. Let's print it. Like let's
Yeah.
not. And this goes back to what I was saying about limiting your tools can actually bolster your creativity. It's
Yeah.
like if you leave everything open to reevaluation and like reassessment 6 months later or whatever, it's sort of like, oh, you're not even making choices, and you're kind of
Right.
like you're almost like defanging the process. Whereas, like, sure, there might be a time where you're like, well, it's a bummer that we tied our hands like that, but there are ways around it. You're not. So I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
the short answer is like we try to make the call and say this is how that guitar is going to sound.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the writing process then for the album. Was it any different to like White Roses? As your process evolved or changed at all? Because I sort of see White Roses, there were sort of these glimmers of light and hope and love's coming through, and this album feels like it feels like it's written by someone who's happy, more or less, or there's some contentment there. You know what I mean?
Well, I hadn't even thought of it till just this moment, but I think part of it actually comes from pandemic era. Um, what's the word? Sort of outlets, not output, outlets.
Okay.
Because early in the pandemic, um, when White Roses was written, there's like, I didn't go play shows, so like the idea that I'd be performing something was not there. So I think maybe that sort of nudged me towards writing maybe things that are a little more dire, a little more dreary,
Right.
because I knew I wasn't going to go on stage and perform something, and whether or not someone is a Alejandro Escovedo fan or a cheeseburger fan at the Hard Rock Cafe, regardless, you think like, okay, I'm probably going to play something a little more upbeat, and maybe in a 45-minute set there will be one ballad.
Right.
So anyway, that I think that maybe epitomizes the writing process of White Roses. Whereas I think by the time of Gone Enough to Miss, it was like, okay, I'm going to play songs again, even if I'm writing here in my office space where I'm trying to be quiet enough that the neighbors don't bang on the floor with a mop or whatever, a broom. Even so, it's like there needs to be joy, there needs to be
Right.
energy. Even in sadness, there needs to be energy. So I think the venue that I can envision while writing becomes really important.
Interesting.
So that may have to do with it.
It also, I mean, the album though I did notice as well, you do touch on, sort of the numinous and religion, or maybe the contrast between some of those things. Money in Heaven, Twilight, Proof I'm Here, all have quite existential themes on there as well. Apart from being there's some love songs on there, some so am I miles off base with that, or is that sort of thread weaving through there as well? Do you think?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think the idea of belief without religion is critical to me. Like I'm a lover of coincidences and signs.
Yeah.
I just am not as big a lover of them when codified. And yeah, I think like, yeah, omens. I really love omens.
Yeah.
And what I find funny about them is like superstition is this weird thing because it's sort of like it's almost like not wrong, like if you see a sign, what you want to consider a sign, and then the thing that happens because the thing you think the sign is portending happens, like does it make it not a sign just because there's sort of not necessarily a butterfly effect? Like
Right.
it's all here. So I think belief is this fascinating thing, and there's sort of no like right or wrong to belief. The only wrong thing you can do with belief is force someone else to believe the same things.
Of course.
But I think there's beauty to superstition. Like I feel like there's a need to have something. Life is hard enough without belief. So
Well, it's
I
the
don't know.
experiential versus the actual, right? I mean, and then that's, of course, that's the world we all live in because we aren't machines, we are humans. And whether you believe in, we're getting deep now, but whether you believe in free will or those types of tenets doesn't really matter at the end of the day because we still are experiencing what we're experiencing. So I'm fully on board with what you're
Totally.
saying. Absolutely.
Yeah. I agree.
So one last comment before we start digging into the songs, maybe a little bit is, and I always sort of think about things as petty because this is a Tom Petty project, but we're talking about your music, not petty. But there is a petty-ishness in one regard on this, and it's that Full Moon Fever into the Great Wide Open thing that Petty did, where the songs on this album are very lean in a way, like in that way that it's exactly as much as the song needs, but never more than that. And yet they are layered upon layered upon layered with all these different tones and these different ideas, and yet you make it seem really, really simple. And again, I think that's a very, very, very difficult thing to pull off well, and I think you'd absolutely nail it. Unless it's supposed to be busy, which on Chameleon, there's a lot going on that, and that's kind of what I'd say noisy deliberately. So getting
Uh-huh.
that blend right again, I think is just an absolute trick, man. I think you've nailed it on that regard.
Thank you so much. Simple is pretty much always what I'm going for. Short. I try to write shorter songs, simpler language.
Yeah.
It's the goal. Sometimes it's me on my trajectory from Elvis Costello to Tom Petty. Like Elvis Costello is high school me trying to work in all the vocab words and the clever lines, and I love him, but man, I try to go towards Petty because he says so much with so little, and it's
Yeah.
that's the goal. It's the goal.
Okay, well let's jump into some music then and into the songs Homesick Alien. If we're talking about lyrics then, you've got love foreshadows danger on the crooked road to sin, paving it with anger, I'm a homesick alien. So like you said, there's no big words in there. There's no $20 words, but it expresses this really cool idea, this big idea, really, really concisely and really, really well. Where did that song come from?
Let's see. 1 second. I'm going to turn on my space heater.
Okay.
We're dying here in San Francisco.
Oh no.
Been on a sub 50 degree for months now. Not fun.
Oh my
God. What
dude.
is that?
Oh mate, I mean,
That's
don't even get me
nothing.
started.
No, I know. It's cold, but our homes aren't insulated. They're not
No,
built for this.
no,
We don't have.
Of course not.
Our heat is terrible. You turn on the heat and it's like been on for hours and you're huddling around. Anyway, Homesick Alien. That one took a really long time to write. It went through a lot of iterations. I think I think it's a bit of an ode to myself and my feelings of otherness, and otherness being a word that I use with all respect of awareness of my being not very other in almost any sense as far as geopolitical demographics go.
Well, any outward sense, but that's not,
Yeah, I think since leaving college and recognizing that the music I'm into is very much at odds with my generation, and we discussed TikTok already, the movies I like, how I choose to identify based on the art that speaks to me. It's sort of I don't know. It's a song for myself that I dedicate it to myself in a way. It's it hopefully stops on the right side of being sort of self-pitying or anything. I think it's
Oh yeah, I
it's sort
didn't
of
get
what
that from it.
oh well, good. I mean, it's sort of what I said earlier. Like, thank goodness we don't all like the same thing.
Yeah.
It's much more joyous if we're all from different places. So I think it for me it touches on the alienization. Shouldn't have used that word. That's like defining a word using itself. It touches on some maybe estrangement from culture, but also for me it's also pride and happiness about coming from somewhere different and hoping that that's a valuable piece of who I am, not something that will ostracize.
But that resonates though with people, right? Because all of us are outsiders. Well, most of us are right. So unless you're a complete egomaniac, we're all outsiders, really. We just, and when we
Yeah,
find that
yeah.
someone's saying that, it's like, okay, I definitely relate with that. And as much as we want to say we're all cool and we've got our tribe, we're all alone. We get very more existential than I thought we were going to get in this conversation. I was going to say though, it's a perfect opener because it brings
Thank you.
in, for me anyway, it sort of brings in a lot of the elements that we're going to hear on this album. It's got guitar and it's got synth and it's got all these elements, but it sort of introduced a lot of them gently, and it's got that fantastic instrumental break section in the middle. That's what I was thinking. You said like this song was sort of hard to write. I imagine that bit was really hard to arrange in the middle because there's so many different parts that are woven together there.
Yeah, it's the instrumental bit after the second chorus,
Yeah,
that or okay, yeah. Yeah, that is one of my favorite. The singer Megan, who does a lot of the weird stuff on that song, she has this great sort of like chromatic scale thing in there that
right.
I don't even know how she does it. Like literally, I do not know how she does it. In a more figurative sense too, but I wouldn't even know how to start. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it was almost one of those songs where actually the instrumental parts I thought were so cool, and I kept writing these, coming up with lyrics and melodies that I didn't think were becoming of the musical elements. So
Oh,
I
cool.
kept redoing the vocal melodies over a year, literally 10 months, literally, like just kind of every week would have a different iteration and would bring them to James and be like, well, what do you think of this? And half the time he'd say, I can't even tell the difference,
Right.
but you need to hear that too. So yeah, I don't. It was a sort of a slog. I'm thrilled that it's done. I'm finally coming back around to performing it and being able to sit with it. But it was in a way, it was the instrumental parts that kind of propelled me to keep working on the vocal parts, because I knew it's like, okay, there's cool stuff here. I
Yeah.
think these riffs are really cool. I just need to do something that is, uh, comparable.
But you mentioned the sunk cost fallacy earlier, right? It's that thing of when you know there is a song there. I think that's that discipline too, right? Of being further along in your career as a songwriter and having written all the bad songs as well. You think, okay, I know there is something there. I've just got to stick with it, and eventually it will come. And then you can't force it, right? As soon as you start trying to force it, then you're knackered. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and just and it's another great thing about these low stakes gigs is like I'll take, okay, here's Homesick Alien, 3.5 or something,
right,
and maybe it got to about version 200, but I'd be playing there at 9 o'clock. The dinner crowd is mostly gone, and it's like, okay, here's the version I have right now. Let's see, how does it feel?
yeah.
And sometimes being on stage, even if you're not really playing for attentive people, that's a great way to determine if it's going in the right direction.
Or if it's working for you, because it's got to work for you first and foremost for you to be able to sell it,
Oh
right?
yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so second track, Stay, is this gorgeous sort of contemporary Motown swing track that comes out of nowhere that I wasn't just the feel and the vibe of it. I was like, this is just a really pretty song. But I feel again that I'm going to read my notes. It feels like it would have taken a long time to put together. Again, this one, even though the chord progression is pretty simple, it's got that sort of. I could see if I wrote that song and I was trying to record that, but like, I don't know if I like that bit there or if I like this. There's a lot of ways you could take it, and I think that where it ended up is exactly where it should be.
Well, this is one where we kind of had to sort of stem our impulse to be like, well, we're in the studio, what can happen?
Right.
Because there are very few things in it that are sort of like studio magic, as it were. I mean, the recording is great. It sounds really great.
Yeah.
And the engineers did a fantastic job. But in terms of like the performance, there's not a whole lot where you're like, oh, like, wow, what that choice. It's more like, let's play this as if like a really good band is playing this and just kind of do some overdubs, dress it up a little bit. But
Yeah.
so yeah, it was kind of the exception where it's like, let's not make this a studio song.
which is as it's as important a choice as anything else, right? But
Yeah.
the
You
clip
gotta
it's
know
the
where to stop.
shortest song on the album, 2, 3, or 3. Like it gets in and it gets out. My friend Randy, who's a producer, he loves brevities. He's like, you don't need that 18
Oh
minute
God,
outro on it. Just let's trim that down, right? So
me too. I wish all the songs were that short. I really do. It's another thing of the kill your darlings thing. It's like for 3 verses is often too much, but
right.
man, more than 3, you better have something to say.
Okay, proof I'm here. Third track. I love the intro to this song. It's one of might be my favorite intro on the record, and I wanted to play a little bit of this because I want to play the bit where we go from the chorus into the bridge because it's a brilliant bridge, and then when it comes back out of that section, we get back into that little intro guitar lick is just so beautifully flowed that I just wanted to play a little bit of that for us.
When you make me cry, you're the proof I'm here. Let's turn some assaults down in the basement. Let's turn on the fog machine. Every inch of you is beyond replacement. I adore you, sight unseen.
That's just beautiful. That is absolutely, those moments in songs when if you get that response, which not everyone does, that I realized not too long ago, when all the hairs on your arm stand up. That's one of those moments for me in that song when that
No, thank you.
there's just something about that blend of those chords, the way you're singing it, and the whole vibe of it. It's just like, oh, it's just so beautiful. I love that part of that song.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. The that riff, the acoustic guitar thing, the intro is whenever someone asks if I write music or lyrics first, I always say that I have it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, really. Like I have these riffs and these lines, and it might not fit together for like years. And that this is a good example because I had that riff for years before it got attached to this song. So again, like Homesick Alien, a song where I really felt that I needed the song to match the potential of the riff, and I feel that worked here.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're going to go to another song I want to listen to a little bit of. So, Umbrella on a Sunny Day. Let me make sure I got the right points here. And again, I love the ending of this one because there's something about when you go back to the intro in a song, it's not always the right thing to do. And sometimes you should have a crescendo. Sometimes there should be, like a guitar solo in the outro of a song sometimes. But when it goes back to the beginning, there's something about that circularity of it that I think really, really works. And I like it on this one too. We'll play a little bit.
I am your umbrella on a sunny day. I am waiting till it's raining. I don't care how long it takes.
So what makes that for me is it's just the choice of those two piano notes. They're, I don't know, they're thirds or fifths or something, and it's just playing. They're suspended, and it gives that whole section this sort of. There's a wistfulness to it that I really, really dig.
Yeah, those piano notes were such a. I think I just kind of hit them accidentally. James and I were doing pre-production work at his place, and
Right.
we're like, I don't know, that's kind of cooler than like what would happen if we thought about it. Like there's piano in the second verse as well, that does not align with the chords of the guitar and bass. And it's like, I don't know, this is a lot cooler. Like it's the right amount of chaos, especially for a ballad like this, which border of the full record, it's the closest to sort of like a loungy thing. So it's sort of this like, well, that's weird. That's I don't know. I get a lot of joy out of stuff like that.
Yeah, anything where it's different, right? When you're listening, because you probably listen to music the same way I do, is when you hear something, you go, "Whoa, that I wasn't expecting that. That's kind of cool. What is that? If you have to rewind it or skip back, then you know you're on to a winner. So.
Yeah. I just thought I'd say about closing with intros is I generally speaking, I don't know the last time there was a song that faded. I usually avoid fades in songs because I just kind of like having here's where it ends.
Yeah.
That's not there's so many different ways to do it. Like Talking Heads, I'll say again, huge influence, and so many of their songs were these extended jams, and then sort of putting the songs together from the jam. So it's not like there was an end. So it's not like a fade is a cardinal sin. But for me, I learned early on that it's like it's cool to know your song well before you start singing. To quote Bob Dylan.
It's a great line in this too that I wanted to sort of flag up. I will adjust if you ask me to, but be aware I can't promise you. And then I'll emerge with the proper new behavior. And that's such an unusual sort of form. There's an unusual formality to that language, right? It's almost got this sort of Edwardian Victorian sort of sense of propriety to it that I just think is super, super cool.
Well, that line comes from not the language itself, but the idea of it comes from the author is a woman named Julia Alvarez. She's a great American author originally from the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
And she has this bit about, is it really love if you don't love someone as they change? Like, do you really love someone if you don't continue to feel that way?
Right.
And I just think that's such a beautiful thing. The idea that that to really love someone is to experience life and progression, and that it is so much easier to project oneself onto a so-called loved one.
Yeah.
And that their sort of agency is lost in that. So anyway, that's where that idea came from.
When you sort of touch on that too in Twilight of Our Prime, right? You're talking about monotony is special when I'm sharing it with you. That's that same idea that, the big moments in a relationship they're all fine and well, but you've got to deal with the Tuesday afternoon when the laundry needs doing and the the dog needs to, you know what I mean? That's what love is, and that's what a relationship really is all about. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, the air that I breathe. We get back into sort of, you've taken that little detour into more of a loungy vibe, but we get back into full on electronica with this one. And I love it's almost you rush the two lines in the chorus where we go from I don't have a religion, but I sure have belief. It's no wonder I'm winded. There's no pause there between sure I have belief and it's no wonder. So when you listen to it the first time, you think, oh no, we're going straight back into the next line. And I was trying to count in it. I think it's over like the chorus lines are over 6 bars or 5 bars rather than being over 8. So I think that the timing of that is unusual. Again, it's one of those things that I'm like, that's kind of cool. I really like that.
Yeah, I mean that in a way it traced that back to wanting shorter songs and doing less. But there's the same thing actually happens in Umbrella on a Sunny Day. In the middle of the 2 verses, there's a bar is dropped.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like we're trying to be. I try to be very Spartan about it. It's like, does this need to happen? And then to me, that's another place where I hope it. Now I'm talking about the Air That I Breathe chorus again. I hope that it makes people scratch their heads, but hopefully not in a way where they're like, why? They don't know exactly what's happening, but it's like just off a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a specific song that inspired this, a Magnetic Field song, where it runs into the next line, and I thought that is so cool. Like, I think it's easy to, when you grow up playing acoustic guitar, it's so easy to stand on stage and like kind of strum an extra couple of bars.
Yeah,
there's almost sort of like a tradition of it, like Bob Dylan or Phil Oakes or something. Or Billy Bragg, Woody Guthrie. You go listen, and a lot of their recordings, there are these sort of like spare bars around while they kind of like hover for the punchline. And that's cool. Like I dig that tradition, but I kind of want to do the opposite, where it's like, all right, keep up. Like the song is going to keep moving. And I think the the drum track on Air That I Breathe sort of reinforces that. It's like very driving.
Yeah.
Everything else has to sort of bow down to it. It's not stopping. It's almost sort of mechanical, and like it dominates.
But the second verse, because the second verse picks up that pace you're talking about, the drums come in a little bit more fully, but it's almost got like there's a sort of a Beatlesy, it's almost like an Obladi Oblada kind of fun to it, where it's quite, it lifts and it's a bit lighter and it feels a bit more, you can move your shoulders to it, and it's dancey, right? So I like that progression in a song. I do so many bloody podcasts, music podcasts, and I'm doing one with a friend of mine called The Ultimate Catalog Clash, where we look at different artists every season. And one of the things we noticed when we did the Foo Fighters season was that Dave Grohl tends to do, this is this section, this is this section, this is this section. And they don't tend to vary a whole heck of a lot. In the really good songs, the ones that always stick out, they do. But that's what I'm always looking for in a song is the song as it progresses, even though it's the verse section, can you do something different? Can you bring something else? And this song, I think, again, accomplishes it beautifully.
Cool. Yeah. Well, that's another thing James and I try to do every song. It's like, it's okay to tell the story the same a few times when you're on stage, but when you have a studio at your disposal, you better figure a way. You better keep it interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so Chameleon comes next. Now, to say that this is maybe a bit of an outlier on the album just in how dark it is, because this is a pretty dark track, right? This is where we're getting into some stalkery kind of, that kind of area where we're singing maybe in character and that kind of stuff. So there's lots of angles in it, lots of space. The vocal effects I wanted to ask you about, though, because it's got this weird, I'm assuming it's doubled. That vocal, I think, is doubled and then harmonized in places.
I don't know if it's actually
or is it just a delay?
I think there's a sort of John Lennon effect that he would sing through something where it sounds doubled. I don't think they actually used a double in the mix.
Okay, interesting. Okay, because there's also like there's a reverb on there for sure, but there's something else in there as well. There's something in the signal where it's like it makes your voice sound like it's continuing on past the end point of the syllable, which again I just think what I like about all these little things that we're talking about is it's not on every song. That just happens on this song. There's little pieces that just come in and they're only used once, right? So it's that kind of this blending, like I said, and then pulling it all together works. But I did want to play a little bit of this because the end of the chorus, and we get the push, and then the beat comes right back in instead of hanging. We talked about this already about leaving those bars where the beat just continues through.
Right.
Then we get that lead guitar part and the chord change, and so I wanted to play a little bit of this one for people. So you got that big flange on the guitar, and it's got that super trippy, dreamscapey feel to it. And one of the things I was thinking back as I was kind of doing the review for this was there is a lot of different ideas on this album, and there's no two songs really ever sound the same. But I think one of the underpinnings that give it that consistency feel is a lot of those big washed synth pads where they're just having a little bit of color, a little bit of texture, but it gives you that cohesiveness. And it was on this song that I thought, I think that's where I'm finding that through line, or that common thread.
Yeah, well, this is, as I said, the mix of this song really changed the trajectory, and in a way that the way the snare is processed on that section, it's just sort of barely even made to sound like a snare anymore. I was like, that is really cool. Those are the decisions that we should be making. And this song's unique. It was the only one recorded in a different studio. Because with Peter, the guy who mixed, this was the only one he worked on in the studio with us, because he had been selected to go do this mixing program somewhere in France, and he needed raw material to go do it. So he said, "Hey, will you come do a song with me on the house? I need tracks." So full day of recording, totally comped. So when we'd done
Nice.
most of the record already, so we brought up this was a new song, so we brought it up, and ironically, the reason that, as you say, that super like washed out dreamscapey bridge thing, the reason that is because I didn't have time to really write a bridge proper because we just ran up with this. So instead of giving me time to write something that is more like I would probably usually write, which is to say having lyrics, we just thought, well, this is cool. Like, this is different. It goes into
Yeah.
halftime.
Yeah.
So, sometimes, as they say, the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad it did that, because I think it's a unique, weird spot that obviously went on to implicate the tone of the record in a way that makes me really happy.
I think that's also, again, though, what sets apart a good artist who's got longevity is, or one of the things anyway, is paying attention and knowing, actually, I would have filled that in. I would have colored in a little bit more there, but I think actually just leaving that as a pencil sketch, that's really, really cool. And that works for this song. Just being attuned to that and sort of having that confidence to say, yeah, I'm not going to write anything else there. That's good. That really works. It's really cool. Big single time, I think. Twilight of Our Prime. This is, this is the big hit, or that's what it sort of sounds like when it comes out.
Yeah.
How did this one start? Because this one's got such a big propulsive pop arrangement that it's almost hard to imagine this one as just starting out with a guy strumming an acoustic guitar.
Yeah. Well, again, this one is sort of about subtraction. Like the riffs I came
Right.
up with are very, very much not what ended up sort of being the riffs. Like the thing that ends up starting the song, not the take on me chord, but the guitar
Right.
that comes after that is very, very sort of like needly. It's like sort of pinpricks almost. And I had something much different.
Okay.
And I had that line, Twilight of Our Prime. I had that going through a few songs before it became the title of a song. And I would bring over songs and be like, well, that's the line I'm excited about. That's what I want to sing. So
Yeah.
eventually I just sort of kept hammering on it until it was like sort of sometimes you just want something to be the big, stupid, dumb title of the song that is
Right.
impossible to not know it's the name of the song. And this one sort of gravitated that way. And yeah, I think we dressed it like it was going to be a big pop song. Who did we? There's someone I think we were thinking like Paramore or something sort of like
Yeah.
that. Like
Paramore Killers,
should
that kind of.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah. It should sound like a band, but we're not trying to be a band like that has any sort of like obligation to sort of performing like a band.
Yeah.
It's like we're just a pop band that happens to use rock instruments in a way.
Well, and it's
That
got,
was the ethos, I think.
and it is arguably the poppiest song on the album, and yet it's also got probably the crunchiest, heaviest guitar tone on it.
It's
You know,
true, yeah.
It's got that,
Yeah, and yet it's almost sort of like an engineer's approximation of what like a heavy
Right.
electric guitar sound would be.
Yeah.
It's almost like if you told, a guy in a lab coat to like here's a waveform of what it would be. Turn a sound into that.
Yeah.
Instead of like showing him what a guitar sounds like.
It really works, though. I mean, and I love it as a sort of a rumination on making the best use of our time, and because we talked about a little bit, touched on this, I'm not a religious person either, so I do believe this is our only shot. So we may as well pack as much life into life as we can. And again, I sort of said that line already. Monotony is special when I'm sharing it with you. It's practically essential to a love that's really true. And again, after 2.5 decades of being married, I can assure you that you are absolutely correct in that. So.
I'm just getting started, but I hope it will all be special. I believe it.
Okay, we've got 2 songs left. Money in Heaven. I think this is the only one that wasn't released as a single. Am I right on that? Or
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it just by virtue of being the last song,
Right.
for all intents and purposes, the album was out when it came out. And it's by far the oldest song, actually. This one
Okay.
dates back to definitely pre-pandemic. So I don't exactly know why I kept this one around, but I'm glad we did. I think it
Yeah.
arrived somewhere cool.
Some really nice bass work on this one too. And you said you got a good bass player. Some really nice bass runs on this, and it's another cool arrangement because the drums are sort of playing at halftime, but there's lots of eighth notes on the guitar. So you've got that sort of marriage of those two elements, and the drum pattern on this one with the double kick, snare, double kick, where the snare only happens once in the bar. So again, just as a drummer, I think that's not what I would have done, and that's super, super cool. That's a really, really nice way to approach it.
Yeah, this one. Well, first of all, this one was a song that had more verses, and I killed them because less, and it's also one where no two sections are quite the same. Like none of the three choruses are the same arrangement. So it's obviously not a through composition, but production wise, it's a through process.
Right.
And it's another part where right after the bridge going into the final chorus, there's just sort of like chaos.
Yeah.
And that speaks to me a lot. Like having a producer who introduces chaos that I didn't necessarily intend is very exciting to me, because I don't know, I love where words sort of fail, where words are insufficient to communicate, and to me this is an opportunity for the words to have sort of, or the noise, and here I mean noise, not just music, noise, for it to like sort of take over and speak where other elements can't.
Well, this is where, making my notes for this one, I had to try to remember how to spell the word cacophonous, because I don't write that word out very often. But I was going to say too that the hook in this song for me is that it's that discordant note at the end of, after the is a past life dream, and then you've got there's that weird note in there that doesn't belong, and yet when you hear it, it's like, oh, that's so good, that's so clever. Again, it's just one of those little moments. I think, I don't think anyone else would have done that. That's just a little bit of genius in there.
Oh, great. So thank you.
Okay, last song, the closer. And I'd written somewhere on social media, and it might have been on Twitter before I killed my Twitter account. So I described Crying Lessons as a song Jeff Lynne wrote for Roy Orbison, but he passed before he could record it. So Matt Jaffe picked it up and brought it home.
I love that. That's I'll take it. Yeah, it's I guess this one is also, this is the second behind Stay in terms of just being sort of like a rock band performing a song.
Yeah.
It's a little more dressed up. It's got some flavors that probably wouldn't make it on stage in my current configuration, but we're like, well, the song begins and ends with just a drummer.
Yeah.
That was almost meant to be like, well, what if a band was rehearsing and the drummer just sort of wanted to get the tempo and get things going? Maybe he had a hot date after or something. and this one, thinking back on it, this was probably the most fun to do basic tracks on, because it's just, the guitar is just driving, and there was the least consideration given to how things were going to be sort of crafted later on.
Okay.
Like Twilight of Our Prime or Money in Heaven, those or Chameleon, those ones, guitar tracks, it doesn't matter that much because the scratch guitar is going to be taken away, and yet you can impact the way the drummer and bassist play.
Of course.
If you perform at odds with the sort of artistic intent. So that I kind of had to be careful in a way and stay in my lane. Whereas Crying Lessons, like we each had our freeway, so it was just sort of joyous to perform. And I think I'm not sure if it was the last song we did basics for, but I know it was the last one we did for the 1 week that we were there. I'm not sure if it was the first or second week, but yeah, I don't. It was just kind of joyous to do, and I think when I listen back on it, that the joy is communicated.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. I mean, you mentioned the word tempo though too, and I was thinking about, this is one of those songs where tempo is absolutely critical because if you played this song any faster or slower, really, by 5 BPM, you're gonna lose that slouchy, slow swing of it, and it won't be the same
Yeah.
song, which is a weird thing, right? You don't often think about that, but tempo really is critical, and I think none more so
Oh
than this
yeah.
song.
Yeah. No, we sometimes after 10 takes, and here's another sunk cost fallacy. Sometime after 10 takes, we say, if this were 3 BPM faster, 2 BPM faster, it's going to
Yeah.
be better, which sounds like such a little thing. I mean, even to a musician, most musicians would say, "Are you kidding?" That's like,
Yeah.
but it can be the make or break. It really can be.
It's the same with the chord position, right? Whatever position you play the chords, it just sounds different, and it does become important. You've got to capo certain songs,
Totally.
otherwise they don't sound right. So,
Absolutely, yeah. And you have to be willing to go back and start from the beginning if you feel like you should.
yeah. And I just want to play a little bit of this for people because this is the one that I mean, again, I obviously I'm a big fan of yours, and I've been for a while now, and I love this album. But when I heard this song, this is the song that knocked my legs out. This is like cut me down the middle. This is my next favorite Matt Jaffe song. So
Thank you.
we'll play a little bit of it for people.
Here in the house without windows, I've been a tourist for years. I see the sky through the chimney, and it is the color of tears.
I could totally hear Orbison singing that, man. Honestly, it's just got his voice written all over it. Now, of course, I would say that that's one thing that you have, to your huge benefit is you have this singular, unique, instantly recognizable voice so it doesn't matter what you're singing, it just sounds like you, always sounds like you, and your songwriting's a very specific style. But this one, like I said, I could just hear Orbison singing this one, especially with those big, it's got that Jeff Lynne thing with those chords are very simple, very immediate, very direct, and the drums are so big and bombastic. It's super cool, man. I love this song.
Thank you. Well, Roy Orbison's become my favorite. His Traveling Wilburys songs are now my favorite. When I first heard the Traveling Wilburys records, I was like, who is this guy? I couldn't understand them, and now, like 10 years later, for some reason, his songs have held up so well on those records in a way that some of the others haven't quite as much. I love his voice so much.
Yeah, listen, Not Alone. I mean, it is this thing where, and I think that's the genius of the Wilburys too, right? Where you've got Tom and Bob sound, fairly close. Jeff's got his own thing, and George sounds it the way it does. But when Roy comes in, it just cuts through everything because his voice is so pure and so huge. Like it's this huge instrument that no one else has. Not in rock music, anyway.
No, it's spectacular. Yeah.
So was this always kind of, once you got this set of songs then, I just want to kind of close a little bit by talking about sequencing because, again, I'm always interested. I like sequencing on albums, and this is why I said to you I didn't want to listen to the singles, all of them. I wanted to listen to the album because then you get this experience. I think this is the closer. Like you said, it ends on that drum, the bit that we get at the intro with that huge reverb on those big, those big drums. To me, it's the only song you could have closed this album with.
Yeah, I think James came up with this as the closer, almost more because he didn't see how it would fit next to any other song. We're like you kind of have this. You're the last song of an album. You're sort of given a blank check, because like it almost doesn't bear any obligation to go with anything because it's like, well, here's the end. And some people use that to put their 18-minute song, like you said earlier. Like it's like, well, it's the end, so we're allowed to sort of break from any commitment to cohesive tone or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it was a bit that because, we're not going to close with Stay. Stay had to be pretty upfront. James and I always do our sequencing separately and then come together and try to put it together.
Oh, cool.
Based on our separate instincts. And Homesick, Stay, Proof, in that order. We both had separately. So we're like, okay, we clearly agree on that. That's going to be the first 3 songs. I want to say that maybe I had Money in Heaven as the closer just because of the way it fades with
Okay.
those sort of kick drums. But I think last songs are sort of this inherent tension between like, if you like something enough to make it the closer, maybe you don't want it that deep into the album.
Yeah.
But you should have something super strong as the closer. So I think I think Crime Lesson might be my favorite song on the record, actually. Even though I think it's a bit of a dark horse because it doesn't really sort of bear any semblance to like a modern pop song, and
Right.
it doesn't have any it doesn't like really have a riff in the way that certain other songs do.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have any TikTok element, I guess I'll say, to circle back to that. You need, I don't know when the first chorus comes in, but it's certainly not under 15 seconds. So yeah, it doesn't have sort of a Gen Z hook to it, but I think it might be my favorite. It's one of those songs that just there are no loose ends, nothing I wish I could continue to tweak.
Yeah, I mean, it's this one and Chameleon. Those are the two that, and this always happens too, right? When we get an album, it's these songs hit you immediately. These are the ones that you end up loving later, and then in 3 or 4 years, you'll think, "How did I miss that one?" When it's not on your playlist, and think, "Man, why is that on my playlist? That's a great track, right?" So that definitely evolves. But for me, I mean, this song, and it's not a little song either. This is a big song. Like, it sounds big. It's about a fairly big topic. You know, we're talking about the idea that life teaches you to be sad, or maybe someone sometimes teaches you to be sad and to cry. But that's okay, because you can use sadness and you can use, you know, those kinds of experiences as tools in your life to become better. So I like ending on that note too. I think just thematically that works for me as an end point for this album. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm glad you like that one. I do too.
It's a great song, and I'll put links in the episode notes for all the songs, but I'll also share that one out on socials for people.
Okay,
So,
great.
This has been amazing, man. I'm still
Great.
waiting for my CDs to get here because our Canada Post is
Oh, really?
they're on strike. So we've had a postal
Oh.
strike. So that's why things are held up.
Okay.
But they've just ordered everyone back to work, which I have mixed feelings about. But so they should be getting here soon. So I'm really looking forward to having the physical copy in my hand.
Great. Oh, well, I'm so glad it's not because
It's not on your end.
Okay. Well, I don't. You know, it's funny. I actually do have faith. Growing up at my age, I thought like, oh, the post service. Like, how can you trust them? It turns out the U.S. Post Service is actually very, very reliable. So I'm glad it's not on their end.
Right.
We like to think of government agencies here as being like totally unreliable. They're
Yeah.
actually great.
It's amazing that it works, right?
It is. It's unfathomable. Like it's, but hey, it connects the world still.
Absolutely. Okay, well, tell people,
Yeah.
because I always tell people on the podcast that, you know, obviously it's important to go and stream because getting those Spotify numbers up is important for artists, for different reasons, but also physical media. Go buy a CD. Tell people where they can find you, where
Yeah.
they can find the CD, and what's going on.
That's great. It makes a difference when people order online.
Okay, so where can they go?
Great.
Tell people where to go.
Oh, well, if you go to my website, mattjaffemusic.com, the store there is, well, I will say, since this is an international production we're doing right now, it is actually not set up for international sales because it does a very poor job of calculating shipping rates. However, if you send me an email or a DM or anything, I will absolutely make it happen. We just need to do it person to person, which is how life should be anyway.
Absolutely.
If you happen to live in the dare I say United States of America, my God, you can, however, just purchase directly through the website. And I'll say for all people who are on streaming pays peanuts. It's still useful. We still want you to go stream on Spotify, but if you really want to support me or your favorite musical artist, go order a t-shirt or a CD or a fanny pack, whatever merch they have, because that will truly support them.